Welcome to Illusion HorrorCon 2025. You are about to hear a recorded panel discussion featuring game designers, writers, and community members from across the tabletop role-playing space. Please note that the views and opinions expressed during these panels are those of the individual panelists and moderators and do not necessarily reflect the views of Illusion Horror and Con, its organizers, sponsors, or partners. These discussions may include mature themes, critical perspectives, and personal experiences related to tabletop role-playing games, horror, and creative work. Listener discretion is advised. Panel topics are intentionally open to the attendees' interpretation. Our moderator and panelists are encouraged to explore the subject freely, share their own experiences, and engage in thoughtful discussion. Time has also been set aside for audience questions and contributions. This recording is part of the Illusion HorrorCon 2025 Untethered Realities. For more information about the convention, upcoming and past events, please visit our website or join us on Discord. And now, let's begin the panel.
Hello, and welcome to the 4th annual Illusion HorrorCon Untethered Realities. Hooray! Yay!
Whoop, whoop, whoop,
I'm Crystal, and I am one of your con organizers. I'm here with the 2 other con organizers as well, and we're just here to chat about what's going on in the con, a couple of the rules, couple of reminders about some things that we've got going on. So let's have David. What's going on in the con?
Well, the con is our way of having a horror TTRPG weekend with friends and unknown. And so over the weekend, we have around 70 games and workshops going on. We have, thanks to the wonderful GMs that have submitted their games, we have panels going on. We have, like such today. We have also some live streamed actual plays that are being run by some of our crew here. And I think overall it's going to be a long but very enjoyable weekend with lots of fun. And if you have not played with us before, then I think it's a great introduction. Join our server. There are always last-minute calls for dropouts for games. So keep an eye on our server as people might offer some slots in their games. And I think additionally, Ryan, there's something else that we do, right?
Yes, we do all kinds of things here. But yeah, one of the main things we do is we always reach out to our wonderful sponsors, and they donate prize lots for various charities. The ones we have running this year are the Child Fund for Australia, and we have the Trevor Project from the US. These are wonderful charities that we've supported for the last 4 years or so. And we usually have a third in there, but we just decided that if somebody wants to submit a donation to their own personal charity, that is valid as well. It's $1 or I think it's $3 for 1 ticket and $6 for 3. And we have wonderful prize lots from Helmgast, which is the creator of Cult. We have Chaosium Inc., which is the creator for Call of Cthulhu and other systems. We have Onyx Path Publishing. They're back for their 2nd or 3rd year. I think we have The World Below, Pugmire, and a few other prizes there as well. We have Architerica, and I said that right this time. That is from an RPG company in Ukraine. We have Odd Duck Dice, her online store from Etsy. 2 wonderful resin bullet style dice sets. And we have the One Shot RPG, which is an indie creator out of the Atlantic coast of Canada. He has been on many streams. You probably know him as Fazul. And so thank you. Oh, Free League Publishing as well. They have the Alien Evolved PDF set up for raffles. So thank you for them. They've let us raise close to, I think over the 3 years, we've had $2,000 to $3,000 worth of charitable donations. And that continues to grow 100%. We'd like to thank them all and thank everyone who's out there. And the raffles will stay open for a few weeks after the con in case someone wants to, donate later on. So yeah, take a look at that. It's on our website. And besides that, we have one of the things that we tried it once last year. We have a streamed actual play. We did Oakwood Heights last year from Cult. This year for Cult, we're doing Till Death Do Us Part. That's a two-parter. We actually just did that in the slot. Death is only the beginning. And we have Tom Murr running a slot of Mothership and a slot of Curseborn. So look out for those on Saturday and Sunday. And that's all we have going for a lot of more actual plays this year in case people out there did not get into a game and they took the time off anyway. So why not sit back and watch people die horrifically on stream or try to survive? So yeah, that's
Absolutely.
for me. Thank you.
Yeah, great. In addition to the actual plays that you can watch on Twitch, Kick, and YouTube, we have panels, which we're going to have our first panel coming up here after we're done yapping about the con. So stay here and check out that panel. It should be really informative. It's about being a first-time horror a first-time horror GM in TTRPGs, and should be great. And check out our website, illusionhorrorcon.events. And anything else, David, Brian?
Join our server where you probably get most of the information and probably also maybe some games if you haven't signed up for us yet. So yeah, I think that's from us. Have a fantastic weekend in 2025 for Illusion HorrorCon Untethered Realities. And I also want to thank, with our last breath here, all the moderators and all the players and GMs who have actually made this con possible. So we're just kind of the people who put stuff together, but you actually carry everything. So thank you all for being this community and helping it grow over the years. And thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the con. Have a good time. Hello, and welcome to panel 1.5 of the Illusion HorrorCon. And this one is for all those first-time horror GMs for TTRPGs. This is a panel to give you some advice as a new horror GM. And maybe a discussion of things that our panelists wish they had known when they first started as well. So I think I'll go around the table and introduce our lovely panelists here. Maybe we can start with my fellow moderator here, David. You want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm David, as you might have just heard earlier. One of those people that are organizing the con. I've been running games for quite a while, published a few as well, and doing all kinds of sorts of projects now in the TTRPG game. And very excited to have the pleasure to speak with these fantastic people around me here.
All right. Let's go to Vince.
Hi, I'm Vince. I run Lorefall, which is a YouTube channel that started out originally as kind of cult-centric, but has ever since luckily flourished into just about anything horror TTRPG, which we're really excited about. And I started my journey with horror and TTRPG trying to kind of finagle D&D into horror, which only worked so well. And then ever since have figured out that there's way better systems for that. And now run games and make content for anything TTRPG horror related. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. Let's go to the other David. David Whitworth.
Yes, the other David. That is what I shall be known as. Hi, yes, I'm David. I'm been around for a fair few years in the horror community. Part of Darker Days Radio podcast, where we talk about horror RPGs and stuff. I've written a fair bit in various systems, and yeah, I think that's about it. Occasionally appear on streams in various places. I think that's about me.
Great. John.
Oh, yes. I am John Hedge. I'm the backstage manager over at the Miskatonic Playhouse, where we run actual plays, mostly for Call of Cthulhu. I am a writer and an editor. I publish stuff. I'm a circus acrobat and a part-time firefighter, so I have the weirdest backstory you've ever heard. But mostly I'm interested in creating community, and I do that a lot online, creating writing groups and communities of people who like horror as one of my main things. And I'm really excited to talk to people. I have a background in education as well. So this idea of talking to people who are beginning their journey into horror is something that I feel excited to do.
Awesome. And finally, Steve.
I'm Stephen Koontz. I'm the author of the Fifth Conspiracy tabletop role-playing game, and most people know me as the former lead developer of the Roll20 virtual tabletop.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And I think to start us off, I would like you guys to maybe tell us what was your first experience as a horror GM. How did it go? If you can remember it, I don't know how long ago it was for some, or just a general anecdote of maybe one of your first times horror GMing, and how was it? Reflections now that you're more experienced. Does anybody want to start us off?
I go.
You're twitching.
I have managed to remember mine, so I'll do it. My first ever experience, I ran Amidst the Ancient Trees, which is the scenario you get if you buy the Keeper's Manual for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. And I remember that I was trying to get my friends to play something other than Dungeons and Dragons, which, to be honest with you, is probably a fairly universal experience, and we definitely will try and touch on today. And it went all right, but it didn't go great. I remember a couple of things. One is I remember I killed almost all of them, so I did something right. But when I did, the deaths weren't particularly meaningful. It was just like one guy fell off a cliff, another went crazy. And I kind of, looking back on it now, realized I didn't give them very satisfying stories and character arcs. And the other thing I remember is that I really, really enjoyed it because I didn't know what was going to happen. One of my favorite things about running horror in general is that I sit down and I do not know what's going to happen. And that's really, really exciting to me. And really, I think it makes a big step difference from those who are used to running hero's journeys where the players are going to win. I do not know what's going to happen when I sit down at the table. That's the best bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can touch upon it as because I kind of mentioned it before. Much like John, it was kind of a trying to get out of D&D situation. I grew up and started playing TTRPG as the forever GM in D&D. But personally, the stories that fascinate me, the things that resonate with me that I want to play are on the darker side. So my D&D campaigns, which were always homebrew, kind of tended to shift towards horror, and still do. We still play every week. But the great thing about that was that eventually, after years of playing, you had the trust of the players, which again, I'm sure we're going to talk about today, of that thing of trust and being able to be comfortable at the table. And I ended up hearing of Cult actually through, I think it was Seth Skorkowski's YouTube channel. And I was like, well, this sounds exactly like what I want to play. I ordered the rule book. I got Oakwood Heights, and didn't take a lot of convincing for my group. And we ran this, and aside from me just being absolutely over the moon with how great of a game it is, every single player walked out of that experience of that evening, because we did it in a one shot, loving it and asking for more. And that was my first time ever really running a horror, like strictly horror game, and hasn't stopped ever since. And I've learned a lot since that first ever game. But hopefully, yeah, I could share some of that today as well.
Yeah. The move away from D&D is tale as old as time, it seems.
Yeah.
David or Steve?
Yeah, I remember my first horror game was an homage to slasher films of the 80s, and had what I thought was a great experience all the way up until one of the players got so upset and so freaked out that they walked away from the table, weren't able to continue. And this was, 25, almost 30 years ago, before safety tools were a common tool available to us. And it taught me a lot about how it's not just a game, right? When we're collaboratively storytelling, it's a game, but it's not just a game. And that really seared into my brain, from then on out. How do I start doing this in a better, more, not just safe, but meaningful way?
Excellent.
David.
The other David.
I was going to say, when you say David, I think we need a word.
I know. Sorry.
Distinguish between the two. I was going to say beardy, but we're both beardy. So
Yeah.
I can kind of vaguely remember my first horror game where I wasn't a GM. That was 26 years ago now. I vaguely remember it. It was Vampire First Edition. But as a GM, most of my games, even when it's something like Warhammer or D&D or Pathfinder or something like that, they always tended to be horror, just because of who I am. But the one thing that really sticks out to me is the first time GM to people who were new to horror. So not a first-time horror GM, but GMing people who are new to horror, which is also a thing which I think is interesting to experience. And it comes back to the whole D&D thing again. This was a group of people who've only ever played D&D, and I was introducing them on the release day of Vampire 5th Edition. We were running a one-shot in the store. Vampire 5e had just come out, and we were doing an event. And trying to get them to understand that you can't rip somebody's head off, run through a city carrying that head, and then not get into trouble, one, with the Camarilla and the White Tower in the city, and two, the police, because it's a game based in reality. And we see with a lot of these games that are based in reality, like Call of Cthulhu and Cult, I say reality, that people tend to forget about this interaction with the real world, that there are police out there. If you're running down the street with a head, the people around you are going to panic. And so you've got trying to balance their understanding of this and your understanding of how the real world would work is quite a fun thing to get your head around when you're new to this side of things.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely.
So just briefly, I think, I don't know if that's a new thing, but I wanted to get away from D&D. So at some point, so I started also to look into Call of Cthulhu, which was then kind of becoming into my spectrum. And I think the first game I ran in Call of Cthulhu was like one of the Mansions of Madness ones with the group. And actually, I kind of realized by now probably that my pacing was completely off. I've probably watched too many horror movies before because of inspiration, and I just added like slash on horror that wasn't necessary. And like, it's a lot of like simple things that I thought I need to add because it's a horror game now and it's not D&D anymore where we do combat and whatnot. So I need to add instead of like actually listening to players' responses and so forth. And I think once we were introduced to Cult, that changed once more to like, oh, now that's finally like something like agnostic horror settings, PBTA. That's more like the storytelling that I really enjoy. And yeah, I think that's kind of the transition because I realized in D&D, I think it was Princess of the Apocalypse, no, Queen of the Dragon Horde or something, one of these big campaigns that we tried to start. And like I already realized like getting into more horror in that sense, and I didn't like the fighting, and we tried to do more narrative, but the players were just like, let's fight, fight, fight. I want to kill goblins and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not really for me anymore. So yeah, and yeah, obviously, I think then by now we have experienced, and thankfully for all the indie creators out there who create so many different versions of systems, games, settings, genres, that is just pretty much, I don't know, we barely can keep up with all the stuff that we have at home now to kind of just explore.
Definitely.
So I don't say stop doing that, but like give us some time to play things, I would say, for
Slow
the
down a
creators
little.
out there. But yeah.
So, yeah, I think a good transition from that and something that was touched upon by most of you was safety at the table, safety and trust, and maybe bridging the gap between people who are mostly playing games like D&D or non-horror games. So, yeah, what are the things that you do even before your game starts in order to build safety and trust at your table? And maybe also, how do you prepare people who are maybe not horror TTRPG enthusiasts or new to the game? How do you prepare them for that experience?
So I was one of those grognards who had played with the same, extended friend group for 20 years. And when we first were introduced to safety mechanics, I thought we didn't need them, right? We know each other. We're pretty familiar with each other's limits. And then I realized that the reason we failed to tell anything but the same three kinds of Dungeons and Dragons stories over and over and over again is because we were being safe. And the reason we were being safe is because we didn't have these tools. And the tools feel kind of restrictive, sort of like a seatbelt in a car, right? But you don't need your seatbelt in your car when you're going 5 miles in a parking lot. You need it when you're racing 60 miles an hour down an unknown freeway. And those are the type of exhilarating stories we want to tell. So paradoxically, these restraints, these tools allow us to go fast. And once I wrapped my mind around that, they became a permanent staple of my games. And I even went so far as to, obviously, we do a session 0, right? I think that's an important thing, just in case I'm throwing out lingo that people don't understand. A session 0 is a game that happens before the first episode of the story that basically aligns everybody's expectations on what the story is going to be about. But I went even further than that and came up with this premise document, this form for my games to help people get that alignment of expectations, because it becomes incredibly easy, especially in something like horror, to reject the premise of what we're doing at the table, right? I get nervous, in tense situations, and I personally tend to inject comedy as my kind of defense mechanism to bring down my own personal tension, but that is antithetical to the tensions of horror, which can be good at times. Sometimes you want high levels of tension and you need a little bit of relief in order to bring the tension up again. But consistently injecting comedy is actually me rejecting the premise of us playing a horror game. And getting that kind of buy-in right from the beginning is incredibly important from everybody at the table, right? And then another pitfall is there are lots of types of horror, and I might be comfortable with 5 or 6 of them and deeply uncomfortable with another 3 or 4. And knowing what kind of horror story we're specifically telling becomes an incredibly important part of creating a safe experience for the people at the table.
So can we just put a pin in that idea of comedy and horror and come back to it later? Because I think it's super important, but I also want to get to actually answering your question. Because everything Steve said was fantastic. Steve, you summed it up beautifully. Thank you. I really want to add this idea that when you're playing horror games, your players aren't meant to be scared all the time. They might get a little scared at really high tense moments, but even then, it's not always really fear, and that's okay. What you're often looking to do is make them feel feelings, which can sometimes be fear, but is often much closer to catharsis. They're often experiencing feelings in a safe space. And we're using an awful lot of words that are very empathetic, which many nerds might be a little bit uncomfortable with. And that's sort of fine. And as a new horror GM, you don't have to immediately try and get really strong feelings to come out of your players. But you should know that what you're doing is you are trying to evoke feelings, because that's why we're here. And just to add just let everyone think about this for a second. People don't often watch horror movies alone. Some people do, and that's totally fine. Most people like to watch horror movies with friends. There's some David, I don't even know you, and I know it's okay. I understand. Most people, and that's really important for us to realize, which is the horror is a shared experience almost all the time, and it is those ideas that should be floating around your head as a new GM when you're getting to the table.
Yeah. I also kind of want to come back to something that Steve said there as well, which I think is really kind of important. And there's kind of 2 points that he said. One is that session 0. It's a little bit hard in kind of like conventions where we just do one-shots thrown in with a bunch of people. But if you are a new horror GM and you've got a group of people and you're going to play with them, have this session 0 and talk about the tone that you're going to do. So we mentioned that there's a lot of different types of horror out there, and this is true. And understanding the type of horror game that you're going to be playing is vitally important to how you have that session 0. So if I'm going to play something like Delta Green, that's going to involve a lot of conversation about what is going to happen in the game and are you comfortable with these things happening. Especially if you pick up some of the community content modules and you have a read of them, they can go into some really dark places. But then if you're playing something like Versen, which is more kind of like a gothic folk horror game, and things as well from Onyx Path, where they tend to be a bit more personal horror, where they deal with personal feelings and things. And then you can just kind of run into think games like Shiver, which can go into like your 80s horror and slasher movies and stuff. So understanding that type of horror and then having a sensible session 0 where you go, this game is going to be a slasher. There's going to be lots of blood, guts, gore, and violence. What are your levels and what are you okay with? Or this is going to be a personal horror. This is going to deal with emotions and feelings that may feel very real. How far are you willing to go? So it's not only having this session 0, it's understanding that horror that you're going to be portraying to your players. Because if people turn up and go, oh, we're going to play some D&D, we're going to hack and slash some zombies, and there's going to be like dead people running around and stuff, and then you turn around and you go, well, this is cult. Expectations, manage those expectations. So I think that's, for me, a kind of key point. And I'll let someone else talk about it, but you've got your lines and veils and things like that as well. So if someone else wants to pick up on that.
Yeah, actually, because I had a really great experience with the other David, which was very telling for me quite recently. I have also, much like you explained before, played with the same group for so long. Any kind of TTRPG, be it D&D, whatever. We played Cult together, and when we started playing, it was very normal. I knew everybody. They're all friends that I've had for 10 years, longer, whatever. And I felt comfortable exactly gauging the horror, and it wasn't a failure. It went really well. Everybody got it. But as it's kind of implied, horror usually doesn't happen in the safe space. It is pushing some kind of boundaries in some way. And with that, I felt comfortable doing this, but then people also play these games for different reasons, especially when you start playing with people that you might not know or know for 10 years. As we kind of touched upon, this idea of catharsis and working through something in a somewhat safe space is so important. And this is what I think horror and especially TTRPG can provide in such a unique way, that you can work through anything that you might have experienced. And not everybody knows this about, everybody has their own past in a relatively safe environment, hopefully. And that's what I think makes horror TTRPG so uniquely special and great at that. And then, so me and my friend that I've played with for so long, we're now playing a campaign with David, who obviously doesn't know us, who's never played with us. And I've never had to ask about lines and veils. And then we get this document, and I hopefully you talk about that after quickly, because I loved it. It was incredible. Of this entire list of things to tick, where you stand, how comfortable you are with all of these different things. And as I was filling it out for David, it was the first time I actually thought about this other person that I usually DM for in so long. And I'm like, I wonder where she will put her check marks after having played with her for about 5 years on a weekly basis. And funny enough, we talked about it after, and we're both very fine with just about all of it. But nonetheless, it was just such a telling thing for me to be like, wow, I really should have. Because suddenly when I thought about it that viscerally right in front of me, I'm like, I'm not sure if I feel comfortable, like if I were the GM, let alone David, who doesn't know us that well, pushing all of these things that far. And so hopefully we get to David can talk about how you deal with that, because I loved it. And I will absolutely steal your document and use it in the future, because it was incredible and it taught us a lot, both.
Yeah.
I talk about David's fucked up Excel spreadsheet as well, because I think it's brilliant. And if I can share a little story about it. So David sends me this spreadsheet, which is full of really, really messed up things. And as you go down, it gets more and more messed up until you are just unbelievably confused at the mild-mannered man with a beard beside me, willing to just talk about and game out in real life. But what actually happened was we all filled out the form, and we then played a game together. And actually what happened in the game was that the players immediately started fighting as their investigators, right? They immediately hated one another and were really mean to one another. And the entire story we told was in effect about conflict. The story was really sad. It was about losing a child, but the whole thing, the emotional impact of it was ratcheted up far more than I'm used to games being in. And part of it was because everyone had agreed that they could do that. And again, leading me back to that idea, not all horror is being scared. This was anger. This was denial. This was a whole bunch of emotions pouring out onto screen, which I assume, David, you can tell me whether or not that felt great or not. It definitely sounded like it felt great.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the great feedback. That spreadsheet is one of many ideas that I myself adapted from finding and looking for TTRPG tools, but we've just expanded it based on our needs, which is happy to steal for everyone. We actually put it on our website. You find it under safety tools, under the
we use it for pretty much all of our
code
games.
of conduct. But yeah, to explain, it's pretty much just an online spreadsheet. And it's a communal horror contract, which is slightly different maybe to other contracts. But it helps us to establish very easily an equal base for everyone to understand. Listen, somebody ticked, like you can basically you have 3 levels. You have green, yellow, and red. You can always go to red, but you can never go back down. That means that if somebody says, well, torture is okay for me, but then somebody else says like, this is a yellow or that's a red, that means for everyone that's a red. No, there's no going back, and everybody has to accept this. That also quickly makes sure, as John said, you can start the game, because if everyone filled this out, everyone knows like, okay, I can't go there, I shouldn't go there, and we're all on the same page. And then you can just play. And as Stephen, I think you said too, like it accelerates the story so much faster because you're all on the same page. You know what the limits are. You know things not to cross. And that's it. And you can focus on the gameplay again. And I wouldn't say that even if everything is green, that means that everybody's okay with it. Because as we all said, you might not even recognize something to become uncomfortable until you kind of push it far enough. It is important, especially for first-time GMs, to listen to the players. And if you see, that's why I often prefer also to have the cameras on. If you see somebody kind of clinching and going like further and further away in the corner, or taking off his headphones, stop. Just stop the game. Say, let's take a short. Exactly. Let's take a short break. But Zoom is following you. Take a short break. Take a breath, and just take a short 5-minute break. Talk to the player. Ask him if he's okay, and then can we continue or should we defer for next time? Don't let like the group kind of steer you in continuing something when you notice that somebody feels uncomfortable, because ultimately you want every of the player to kind of have a good time, a nice evening, and not walk away with like mortified expression and then just ghost you because he's too terrified to talk to you afterwards, because he doesn't know how to approach this. Listen to your player. No. Good.
On the same kind of front of that, so you have the Lines and Veils is something that's come out in the last 5-6 years and is now very much plus. One of the first tools that came out that we all kind of heard about was the X card. It's a little bit harder online to do, but there are also better ways to do it online as well through messaging. And this is just like you have the concept of go, yes, you've done your Lines and Veils, but this is your first time GMing or it's your first time playing a game. Someone makes a mistake, someone messes up, or they don't understand maybe what they mean by the Lines and Veils and things go too far and they're uncomfortable. You have the ability to just X that. Whether if it's a online game, you just X it, or you send a secret message to the GM going X. You then just stop that part of the scene, you move on, no questions asked, and then at the end of the game, you have a chat about it and go, are you okay? What was wrong? How can we fix it for next time? Do you want to continue next time? You don't tend, if something goes wrong, I tend not to stop the flow of the game. I tend to stop that part of the game, shift onto something else completely different, make sure everybody's comfortable in a nice, happy way, and then have it at the end of the game. If obviously it kind of does break down into something unpleasant, stop the game and deal with it. But if it doesn't need to stop the game, just shift the focus of the game, move away, but do have a talk about it. One thing that we'll probably talk about at some point is a concept called bleed, which is the game, either the real life bleeding too much into the game or the game then bleeding too much into real life. And you depending on the game, you can come out of them going, oh my God, and then just be wired or mentally ruined for a couple of hours after game. So, but maybe we can talk about that at some point there.
There is a nice question from the audience actually regarding especially the session 0 and the horror context, about how to handle players or people who come into the horror session and kind of seem to have no interest or ignoring safety tools, and just say like, I've got no Lines and Veils, bring on the horror. How do you handle those players?
I was going to actually, I think one of the things I was realizing, we're having a really good discussion about what these lines and veils should be. But if you are kind of in Vince's position where you're sitting down with your mates that you've been playing games, you've been playing D&D with for 10 years, they might not really be up for having a discussion about whether or not they're okay with cannibalism straight away. They're like, okay, bring me the horror. And actually a good way to deal with this is, one, don't make it sound so serious. And the way to do that is to flip it. What are you interested in exploring? So guys, this one has cannibalism. Are we kind of okay with that? Is that cool? Like just pushing the content warnings that you can also just flip around and say, are we all chill with this? Is this a thing you want to discuss? Rather than the check mark off. And the first time you run horror as a GM, also don't go for the really messed up shit. Sounds simple, but it's also like, just if you want to get involved in this, take it easy. It's your first time. Make sure you have a session 0 chat. But even then, it might just be, a few DMs back and forward between people to make sure they're all on the same page. Once you're getting into more stuff and you've moved further on in your journey, you're past your first few sessions, then you can really begin applying a lot of this stuff. But your first step is just be aware it exists and be aware that you need to have those discussions before you sit down at the table.
I think the question was it's a concept that was very much around in the late 90s, early 2000s, and kind of in the first edition of of Cult, of the Edgelord. Mm-hmm. That person who will always push. How would you deal with that? I have dealt with many of them in my past, growing up as a 90s kid, but I'll pass it on to other people.
I just recently had a discussion with somebody, not a player, that kind of came into this discussion that was about lines and veils specifically. And they're like, safety tools are for, like, don't play the game if you can't handle horror. That kind of aura that was about it, that kind of mindset. And kind of to touch back upon my way of trying to explain it to them was bringing up an idea of what we kind of touched upon before. And I think it kind of resonated with them, is like, not everybody has the same past. It's like and at that point I brought up the idea, not to go incredibly dark with that person, I just said, imagine you have PTSD, right? Nobody knows. And this game, or a game, doesn't really matter, the same way that people with PTSD ended up using video games to kind of work through trauma in a quote unquote safe space. This game or these games can provide a similar framework for somebody going through that kind of trauma or any other thing. And who is anybody to deny them that in a certain way? But in the end, it's also on the table. Like if that person really feels that strongly about whatever, then maybe that is not the table you should be playing at. I always think it's fine for GMs as well as for players to say, that's not what I want. This is not what I feel comfortable with, on both sides, be it too much horror or I don't want to. Nobody's forcing anybody to sit on any table and play any game. And I just generally disagree with people having that kind of reaction to, it's for, like, don't even play that game and so on. It's like, I don't understand how some person using lines and veils influences your enjoyment of the game. If you read through the new Alien Handbook and you don't just turn the page, it's not, you don't want to read through the chapters about lines and veils. So, but I often think the way to approach players like that is by trying to explain it to people like that from a place of understanding and a place of curiosity, because I think approaching anything from that kind of direction helps people understand. And I think nobody can and if they still don't understand, it's like, okay, I don't think this is the person I would like at my table personally. So problem solved either way.
Mm-hmm.
To continue my seatbelt metaphor, the X card is definitely the seatbelt, right? Lines and veils are kind of like our road markers, keeping us from colliding with something. And the X card is the reactive one. It helps us when a collision's already happened, right? Harm is impending. And so what I try and do is normalize its use at my tables. I'll play it even on situations that are on a boundary where I probably would have been okay, I'll still end up using it just to normalize its use. And if I think I have a particularly reluctant group of players, if I have my edgelord over there, I will ask everybody at the table to use the X card just for practice. And and I can see them being uncomfortable, but just the fact that everyone's played it once and said something, even though it was a fictitious scenario, it helps. Like, people don't like being the one to pull the ripcord, the emergency brake, right? Everybody seems like they're having a good time, even though I'm feeling comfortable. It's hard to take up that space sometimes. So normalizing the use of the safety tools, that starts with the facilitator of the game. So that's one of the biggest pieces I could give of advice I could give to first-time horror game masters is normalize your safety tools. Don't just use them once in session 0 and then they never come up again. Make them visible. Have X cards on your table, on your virtual tabletop, behind you in the Zoom call if you need to. Whatever it is, make them visible so that they're at least in the background of people's minds.
Yeah, I think just to add a couple comments in the context of a convention situation, especially online convention situation. Yeah, the safety tools are there. I think this was Steve's point, one of Steve's points, or no, John, you mentioned it. This is so that people can really get into their role play. You understand the parameters, and then you can just freely role play within those parameters, and it makes you more free. It makes things easier to just, go straight in, especially when you only have 3 or 4 hours to play a game with a bunch of strangers, probably. The safety tools are, my personal favorite is like the pre-game discussion. Just having 5 minutes in the beginning, just be like, hey, this is the safety tools, just a reminder of the lines. If you have a physical X card, I typically don't do the physical X card. I just tell people to interrupt me when something comes up, because I know myself. And I have a hard time looking at the chats, and I have a hard time, like, I'm distracted by GMing. So I'm just like, just interrupt me, just say, hey, stop. I don't really like that. And then we can pedal it back. But yeah, when you're playing with strangers, it can feel more difficult to have these conversations, right off the bat, but it is very important, and it definitely helps you just get straight away into the game.
Just as a quick point with say with that, like with con games, especially online games, I find it something that David said was have the camera on, because sometimes people might not be, if there's like 2 or 3 people who are very, very chatty and controlling, and then there's one person who is not, and they start to step back. But for most of the game, they might be like that. And then something happens, and then you can see them step back. That's it. The visual clues are so key I find in horror gaming. If there are no cameras on and someone's being quiet, why are they being quiet? Are they just sat there listening to the really cool roleplay that's going on, or is something upsetting them? So I find that, and especially for me, who is someone who is quite visual and due to my own autism and stuff, I can't read a room very well. So being able to see people's reactions to things really helps. And if you're a first-time GM, have that game where you can see people's faces and see their reactions, because it's so much more telling than going, "Are you okay?" And they'll just go, "Yeah." That doesn't tell you anything, because people are people and people lie. Unfortunately,
I also just not let Crystal get on to the next point and make hopefully the last final point. A weird thing that a lot of GMs and people who've been around the community a long time get worked up with is, well, what if someone comes along who's always using the X card and I can't even play my game because they're causing so much mischief at the table? That doesn't happen. People don't tend to abuse the system. If it is happening, throw them out of your community. Don't hesitate. There are some horrible people out there. Throw them out of your community. They don't belong there. They're not welcome there. You're allowed to do that. It sounds a bit brutal, but that is how you make good communities and how you have fun.
Mm-hmm.
So you get rid of the edgelords.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a final point, I guess, on that. If you're playing online, if you're playing a lot with strangers, people are mostly really lovely and willing to use the safety tools and, have discussions and do all those things. Like, you're not going to run into people who are just going to be like X card, because they people are using their precious time to play these games with you. Like, they want to have fun. They're not going to try to mess up your game. So, like, you won't really encounter a whole lot of really terrible people, in my experience, at least.
And I want to just end this then with what somebody said in the comments right now, is that the other thing is, like, you can also ask the players to look out for each other and say, like, listen, if you notice something and I'm looking at the script or like trying to narrate something, please interject and tell somebody to like stop something. And that's why we also implement communal horror contracts. Everybody knows the lines and veils, so they can make each other aware of these lines and veils. But since, given the time that we have for the first time horror GM, I would like to kind of maybe step a bit further. We have installed a safety tool network. Players are kind of aware. We had a session 0 to start with. But what else do you maybe have as next on your agenda when you're a first-time horror GM? What comes next? You've prepped everything. You've hopefully read the scenario that you're playing. You made some notes, maybe. And I know, I'm speaking weird names and language here, but
Notes.
you have the safety tools in place. What else should you consider as a new GM then?
I would recommend probably actually find an actual play. I hate I love being part of actual plays, but I find it really difficult to listen and watch them for various reasons. But if you are new to horror GMing, you want to know and how to get the tone of a game correct, the best thing to do is actually see how the game is actually meant to be, is being not meant to be played. No game is meant to be played a certain way, but go and watch or listen to some podcasts of other people playing it. Ask people who you know are horror GMs for what is the tone, what is the pacing that I should be aiming for. Because a lot of people, if they are D&D GMs, they're like, okay, the game will be introduce the characters, they'll go somewhere, something bad will happen, there'll be a fight. That's 99% of D&D Pathfinder-esque kind of games, whereas horror games are not like that. And you have to have this slow build-up of tension to some extent. So kind of, I'd recommend going and watching some actual plays, listening to podcasts, learn how to, or listen to other people set that pacing.
The framework that really helped me kind of wrap my mind around that, and why, and I knew we were going to come back to this subject, why Dungeons and Dragons tends to be a poor tool for telling horror stories, is I think of it in terms of characters' agency, right? When you have characters that have high agency, it tends towards action, and action isn't horror. As they lose agency, we move towards thriller, and as they lose the majority of their agency, we transition into horror. In a horror story, the forces that you are dealing with are outside of your agency to control, to combat. And so what D&D does is comes with an implicit belief that the characters have agency, and that tends towards action. So how do we, as new horror game masters, how do we create scenarios? What tools do we use then to create situations that are going to build that tension without it slipping almost instantly into action?
I really like starting this by telling the players, this is your investigator character PC. They're probably going to die. This game is finding out how that happens. And start with that, because again, we're talking a lot of people are coming from heroic fantasy roleplay, and they are assuming that they are going to win. And I guess you kind of can, in some lighter horror, win. In Bastion, you tend to find some kind of positive solution. In Call of Cthulhu, it's normally a 50-50 toss-up. You're not going to win in Call. No one wins. Cthulhu Dark, no one wins ever. And just helping them understand this character sheet in front of you is someone who is going to die. You're telling the story of how they get there. It's a much better framing than you are trying to survive against the horrors, which is often what's printed on the back of the books and is actually a false representation and is telling a very pulpy story that probably we're not interested in. Stephen talking about the agency there is really important. You don't have any agency, you're going to die. Let's start there.
I think with that as well, it's setting the tone that if you go into that fight like you would a D&D fight, all guns are blazing, they also have guns, or they have swords as well, and they're the same human as, well, they're probably depending on the game you're playing, probably a monster who's probably going to be massively stronger and better at these things than you, or it's going to be a unit of policemen who there's more of them than the four of you. You're also just a human. Most horror games, you're just playing a human. You're going to get shot, you will die. So I'm giving them, not just going, you are going to die, but also informing them that there's very real possibilities of you causing your own death because you think I can run charging into a combat. Understanding as well that, one, you are going to die, it is going to be traumatic, and that it's going to be an emotional journey. It's not going to be oh, cool, everything's happy, cool, I'm going to find something cool here and do this. I'm going to find something here, and it's probably going to be really, really disturbing. And it's not going to make me feel like a good player and I've succeeded at something. It's probably going to make me feel like, oh my God, my life is crap. Or, oh my God, the world is fucked up. What the hell is wrong with everything? Trying to, I think, as John was saying, is trying to shift that expectation of what the game actually is. It is not heroic fantasy running and saving the world. It's Tom who I'm sure we all know, was telling me about Curseborn, where it's everything is up in the world, but it's trying to make it that little bit better, even if it's through your own sacrifice. You're not going to save everybody. You're not going to succeed at everything, but you might make it a minuscule percentile better for somebody else by doing the story. But yeah, you're probably going to die at the end.
And kind of jumping off of what both John and David said was that you're talking about you're not going to win, but it's more about redefining what winning means in this particular story. It's like winning is telling the cool story of this character's tragic end. We're telling a tragedy now, right? We're not doing a heroic story. We're doing a tragedy. We're doing something that involves you having some level of dramatic irony, where you as the player know this is a terrible decision, and having the character still make the choice to go into the creepy haunted hallway. And that tension is really powerful. and tells really good stories. But you have to be open to that lack of agency.
Yeah.
Good.
I think it's maybe a really good time to bring up the idea of the meaningful death. So one of my early mistakes as a horror GM was being quite casual with killing all players, not players, PCs. Big difference. Don't kill your players.
Make that
Killing off
distinction.
the PCs. It's an important distinction, and I know what some of you are like. And the thing is, so like, I had a character suffer a bout of madness, and then I made him run off a cliff, and he died about 3/4 of the way through the scenario. And it wasn't meaningful. It didn't reflect anything about what that character was struggling with. It didn't feel satisfying. And so it was kind of a rubbish experience for the player. The most well-known example I can think of is The Haunting, the famous scenario for Call of Cthulhu, where there's a bed that moves for some reason that no one's ever fully explained to me, despite the fact that I know everything about Call of Cthulhu, and knocks you out of a window and you might die. Why? It doesn't give us anything interesting to touch on. It doesn't make the player feel like they were there for a point. It's like you've tricked the player and the player ends up feeling bad. That's not good horror storytelling. What is good is when they almost succeed but then fail. What is good is when they uncover the deep, dark truth and then die for having delved too deep. What is good is when there is a good thing about going too far. There is a reason why they want to drive this character like they stole it. And figuring out ways to reward the player characters for going too far, for risking, letting them have really weird, crazy things happen when they get too stressed or lose sanity. Figuring out ways to make those failures fun are all things that really help you become a better horror GM.
But also I'll let someone else quick talk in a minute, but I just want to, with the good death, it doesn't have to be the characters themselves. You can also have that, depending on the game you're playing. So there's a specific game that I ran for Things from the Flood, where the player characters ended up killing somebody. But it was the death of that person they killed that was the important death. And it had to become meaningful. It wasn't, we're just going to murder somebody. This is Things from the Flood. That's not really what the game is about. But the death and the murder that happened was really impactful on the emotional state of the characters. So the good death doesn't have to be the characters. It really helps if the characters die and it's for a good reason, but you can do the same thing with the protagonists or an NPC. Make the deaths meaningful. It's not just like, I'm going to go around and start murder hoboing stuff. But I'll pass on to other people. I've spoken a lot.
I do want to quickly maybe shift here, because like we're already kind of giving advice for kind of goals and running the game. But there's also a good question from the audience about expectations and setting expectations for the game, especially when you're first-time GM and then you have your players coming to you and they're like, "Oh, I watched the Glass Cannon Network, or I watched Critical Dice, and I really like these fantastic role-playing games. Can we do the same?" How do you kind of handle this then? Because obviously, if you're first-time horror GM, you might not become on a level that we might even have discussed now, like the idea of creating a meaningful death and so forth, which is sometimes very hard, especially when you start new in horror, to kind of think about this and like, oh no, I'm not going to kill you off now. I'm just dialing you back, and I'm going to use that later on in different.
Depending on your comfort level with improv as well, because a lot of that can come down to thinking of stuff on the fly.
Yeah. But what is your kind of comment on this question? So the expectations of players who have seen like master produced basically actual plays and then come to your table. What do you say? What do you do?
I think that is as true in horror as it is in just any TTRPG. I think there was obviously a big thing that I experienced when it was in D&D, and I think everybody that ever played D&D felt the second Critical Role rolled around, and everybody was very upset that not everyone is Matt Mercer or Kenton Lee Mulligan or all of these incredible DMs. But I think when it comes to that advice for any new DM in anything, but also horror, is if you figure out what you are comfortable with, where your sweet spot lies and how you run a game, and that doesn't have to be any one thing, it can be whatever, that is going to be way more captivating to any player and anybody at your table than you trying to imitate any other kind of game that they might have watched. And it is a thing, obviously, that players will come up and is like, oh, well, why is that not like this and that? And especially when it comes to produce things, and I'm sure we're going to touch upon this because I'll also have a lot to say there, is for TTRPGs, more than anything, live and die by atmosphere at the table. It is more than any heroic quest or anything, lives and will die right at how the table is set up or how everybody at the table reacts, be that online, be that in person. And the atmosphere is not just the responsibility of the GM, not at all. It's a shared responsibility with everybody at that table. And setting that expectation and making everybody realize that will go a long way in having something feel impactful, having it feel, I don't want to say produced, but getting that feeling of some of these incredible horror games that people might watch. That's what will make the big difference. It's not so much the style of GMing always, but also how much people are invested and how much everybody helps keep the atmosphere alive and not chime in, as we've already kind of talked about, with the quirky little funny joke at the height of the tension, which nothing will bring down a game of horror more than that. So yeah, I'm sure we're going to touch upon that too.
The one piece of really practical advice I can give, I think everyone here is going to tell you the same thing, which is actual players are not like playing at a table with your friends, and that's normal and totally fine. And convention games are different as well. As an introductory horror GM, the one bit of advice I'm going to give you from this idea is help your players talk to one another. And the way to do that is to start by building relationships between the player characters. So as a bad table is one where there are 4 people interacting with the GM one at a time, taking their turns. A good table is one where everybody is talking and the GM sometimes gets to shut up while everyone's having a discussion in character. And that is really what you want to be generating, because once they have begun talking with each other, they'll do a lot of the atmosphere building themselves. They'll build the tension. They'll come up with weird, crazy theories, and they'll say things to each other which will give you ideas that you can then play on later. And you can sit back and you can take the time and you can breathe during the game to come up with your ideas. Encourage the players to talk to one another, help them build relationships at the start of the game. The way to do that, ask people questions about how they feel about each other at the very start. That's really how you begin building towards those feelings and that atmosphere you're looking for.
You've also hit on, I think, what is quite a key point here is the communication. So whether you're a first-time GM in horror or probably just coming in as a first-time GM in whatever game it is, you're not going to be amazing unless for somehow, some luck of the draw, you're a storyteller extraordinaire. Things are going to go wrong. Be open about that with your players. Go, look, this is the first time I'm doing this. Be aware of that. I'm not Matt Mercer. I'm not paid hundreds of thousands of pennies to be on YouTube to do this. But we are here to do a collaborative storytelling experience. And so after the session, please tell me if you liked what it did, if you didn't like it, give feedback and get feedback. Learn from the stories you're telling. You will improve as you go through, and you learn your players, but also get your players to tell you, go, did you enjoy that bit? Did you enjoy the way it went? If not, why not? How can I improve for next time? Have this open conversation about it. That's the only way I think any person in anything is ever going to get better, is if people have open conversations. And especially within horror storytelling, I think having that conversation is probably more important because of the tension building. But also, as John was saying, I love running games where you can just got amazing players and you just sit back for most of the session as a GM and go, and you don't say
Face
anything.
as well.
I mean, that's the best. That's the best moment as a GM for me personally, when you can sit there for 20 minutes, not saying anything, and the players go, "It's job done." And to come off of what you just said, absolutely. Like, I think talking to your players after a session, after a campaign, no matter how long. For me, I ran a 2-year campaign, and in the end, we all sat down at a bar, and I legitimately asked, "What can I do better? What are the things that you loved? What are the things that you didn't like?" And that's probably the moment I learned the most about GMing, or about my style of GMing. And be that in an email or anonymously, however people are comfortable with it, such a great thing to do.
So, as David said, we haven't talked about this particular safety tool, but check-ins is basically exactly that, where you have dedicated time either after the session or during a break to kind of check in with people and make sure that expectations are aligned. Because as I was beating my drum earlier, misaligned expectations are landmines. They will blow up your game. That they're the single thing that is most likely to end a story before it gets to its conclusion. And the best time to dig up that landmine and get rid of it is before the game starts. The second best time is right now. So do those check-ins with your players.
I think that's the key thing just with horror in general, is whether you're sat at home watching a movie with your friends or you're playing a horror game, these games and TV shows and movies and whatnot, they take us places, and we're only human. So look after yourself, look after your friends. We're only playing games. These are games. These are not meant to scar you. So be aware of that as well.
Yeah.
As much as it's fun to be scared.
I just want to quickly also say, I think, taking feedback is definitely something that especially when you start, you want to know, but also be honest with yourself. There are different ideas and approaches that you can take if you only want positive feedback, or if you want only the worst feedback to know what you can improve. But be honest with yourself what you can take, because there's also difference in cultural expectations. So, like, let's say you do a first con game and you're an American and you play first time with Europeans. If you want them to be honest, they will be honest. Especially Germans or Nordic countries, they will tell you what they think, and they will not filter anything.
We will.
So, in that case, just be understanding of what you are comfortable with, and then just make that feedback round. I also did, or for my playtest, for example, I do a feedback for Google form that I send out, where they can rate it anonymously if they want to take some time and process the game beforehand. And then I can also choose, like, do I want to look at all the things, or do I just hide the bad stuff and just kind of read through the good sections that they send or whatever. I think that's one of the things to just be aware. I would say take feedback, but be realistic about what type of feedback you want. Set clear expectations for yourself. Do you want feedback on your narration style, or do you want a feedback on, did I do everything right? I mean, you should ask that no matter what.
Specific about the feedback that you would like to have.
And take some time. And you can, if you have a good friend, to kind of talk with them about the game as well, to just like, what kind of feedback do you think I should get? Is there something that I should focus more on? We're all people. And again, 95% of the time, you will have the most loveliest people at the table that will try to help you become a better GM, and try to make a nice, all we want to do is basically sit around the table for an evening and tell a story, right? And that's ultimately what we're kind of trying to do.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is a good opportunity. David Whitworth touched on this a little bit with his last point. Let's talk about the bleed, the crossing over of sort of the real life with your RPG. And, should you do it? How much of real life should you inject into your game? Advice for, and I think this also kind of touches on how much horror is too much. How far do you go in when you are, when you have a particular scene or particular scenes where you're getting into something possibly sensitive or horrific? Anybody want to take hold there?
So while we wait for John to sort his mic out, I will jump in quickly. In terms of what to bring into a game, again, I think it depends on the type of game, but it's also open discussions at the beginning. It's like, we're playing a game set in modern times. Do you want to deal with the shit that's happening in the modern world at the moment? Do you want to have these political conversations? Or is it something like personal horror game? I'm forgetting the names of things now. Things like Changeling, which do deal with quite personal stories. Have conversations about how far do you want to go with these games like Cult, which deal with very, very, very real personality disorders. Have conversations about this. Are you comfortable with doing this? As much as we do tend to use games to be cathartic, also be aware that unless you are a trained therapist, this is not a therapy session. And I do, if it's a personal horror game where we are going to deal with maybe mental disorders, mental health problems, or like dark backgrounds, and this does hit on somebody's own personal lines, veils, or things, it is not. We are not here to be your therapist. And if you want to have those kind of conversations, please do seek personal, actual help. And this is a conversation if it's a deep game, I will openly have. I have my own mental health issues and I'm open about them. But this is, for me, where the concept of bleed comes in. It's not so much of, do I bring in modern day politics into a game? It's, do I bring in my own personal issues into the game? I personally wouldn't, but a game might bring those out of me. And that's when you need to think about this concept of bleed. And for me, you have an open conversation at the beginning going, this game is going to deal with this. Are you okay with dealing with these themes? This comes in with like the horror contract and stuff. And then at the end of the game or halfway through with the check-in or something, are you okay with the themes of this game? Is this too much for you? And this is another reason why I like having cameras on, because that's when you can see maybe some of the themes are going too far and they are hitting personal notes to people. Check-ins are massively important, I feel, as Steve said, for things like bleed. For me, bleed is more about something happens during a game and someone goes, oh, hang on a minute, that reminds me of this time in my life that was not nice. I hadn't thought about it before. Crap. And it does catch us off guard. It's not something that you can always plan for. No matter how amazing David's spreadsheet is, because I've seen it, it's massive and covers you'd think it covers everything. It probably misses some things on there and then things that people are not always aware of. One thing that really shook me in the game was I was in Japan in 2011 during the earthquake. And I hadn't thought it really affected. Well, it obviously did affect me, but then I played a game which was about tsunamis. And I'm like, nope, not dealing with that. But I hadn't thought about that until it happened in the game. So sometimes the horror contract, we're all like, yeah, it's all fine, and then something happens, and we think of things. So that, to me, being honest before the game, being honest during the game, and be honest to yourself, and do have these conversations, but also remember, it's a game, it's not a therapy session. So I assume John's now got his mic working.
I'm really jealous of how like perfect Steve has his ability to tap on and off, and I just want to copy it, but I don't have as good a setup. Do either of you want to jump in there? I have a nice counterpoint, but no. Okay. So I'm going to provide a counterpoint from David as someone who probably doesn't play quite as intense horror as him, which is that bleed can often be really good because you want people to play with their emotions, and their real emotions are useful. And I think I probably swim in shallower waters, which is why I kind of maybe have a different view of this, which is that all of the really beautiful stories I have about playing horror TTRPGs tend to be moments where something that's happened in the game has reflected something that's been happening in someone's life. And those two things have come together and they've dealt with it in a way they weren't really expecting to. I've got this beautiful story of a friend of mine who their character died. They were then playing that character's twin who had disappeared before that character could die. And then at the end of a game, they got to say goodbye to their twin. And they texted me the next day and said, I left that game and I burst into tears. It was beautiful. Thank you for that moment I didn't even know I needed. So while everything David's saying is very, very valuable, and I really think we needed to hear it, and it's important to hear it, don't be scared to understand that, yeah, your real life emotions will infect the game. And that can often be quite good so long as you are reasonable with it and don't push it too far. And when you feel yourself getting worked up as an investigator, it can be quite pleasant because you get to play out things that maybe you don't get to play out. If you get to shout at a character that's an awful lot like your boss, and you really, really dislike your boss, that's a pretty pleasant thing to do. And so, yeah, I would kind of like, bleed can also be good. It's a complicated one. So I would just thought I'd provide the defense.
No, I'm not saying, I was kind of taking the extreme end of it there.
Oh, yeah. No.
So I fully do think that you should, because horror tend to be more based in real life. And so you are going to find these parallels. I love games where you can bring in real life experiences and you can have those emotional connections. It was more that sometimes we do go too far, and sometimes we don't realize when something goes too far. But if it's a point where it's like I get to scream at somebody who I don't usually get to scream at, or I get to work through something I didn't know I needed to work through in that kind of level, then that's fine. It's just to me, having run some really kind of deep personal horror games, I am not a trained therapist. I am a scientist, but very, very different field. I'm not trained to deal with problems, and most people at the table aren't trained to deal with mental health problems. So as much as it is cathartic to run around, scream, punch, and kick at random monsters, whether that be your boss or something, Die is a great game for this. Because your boss can suddenly become a dragon, but yet you get to kill that dragon and stuff. It's great. We're not here to have a 10-month session of therapy for somebody. There are trained professionals out there. That's just also knowing Tom quite well. Just think questions like that. But yeah, no, definitely go around and do bring in real emotions and real life to it, but just be aware of the lines.
Yeah, I think it happens regardless. Anytime you play, as I kind of, it's not even between. I completely agree with David that it ends up happening and you never know what triggers it. It can be something completely arbitrary that the GM or you as a GM never thought would trigger any kind of memory or emotion or reaction from a player. It can be very simple things that are not covered by the Excel sheet. And that's why I think check-ins are really important. And the other thing for me personally, and also games, is when it's over, when the game is over, I like to call it a little cool down or something. But when it wraps up, don't just, if you're online, don't just log off and run into the kitchen or have your players do that. Or it's easier to do if you're playing at a table. Not everybody just runs out of the front door. It's bring it back to quote unquote reality. Like, take this horror, this game that you've had, this atmosphere that you've created, and slowly shut it down and not just pull the plug. And that also helps people to find their footing again, especially if it's a very personal horror game, especially if it touches on really sore subjects, which I also like to run games more in that vein. It just helps everybody to kind of find their footing again, kind of see legs. And that also helps with, if it did touch upon things like that, that is the moment to kind of find levity, to find reality again, and it can help dampen those things and not make them into such big blunders or boulders or whatever you want to call them going out the door after. So that is my 2 cents to kind of check in, especially at the end of the game, kind of shut it down slowly.
Yeah, to split the difference between John and David, I'd agree that I think bleed's a good thing. I think that when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, if I'm not having some of the same emotional experience that the character is, I'm not really engaging with it. However, I'll also agree that in horror stories specifically, whether it's TTRPGs or movies or novels, the characters tend to be maybe not as developed as in other types of stories. They're more of a vehicle for experiencing the horror than, again, and there's different types of horror, right? So this isn't universally across all the types of horror, but it tends to be the characters are more of a vehicle for you to experience the main character, which is the horror of the experience. And for that reason, maybe I probably experience less bleed when I'm experiencing horror stories than I would in other ones, because I'm a little bit more distanced. But if there's none, I'm not really connected to the story either.
I think that's a thing to kind of bring on as well, is the connection to the story. Because we've mentioned it a lot, is emotion. Horror is about emotion and feelings. If you're not playing on those, is it really horror? So it's kind of understanding the concept of what horror is. It's pushing you into uncomfortable places. So if you're not experiencing those things, whether it's a visceral gore, blood horror, or whether it's a psychological horror, if it's not making you feel uncomfortable, is it really horror? As an open question to people.
I would like to kind of try to bring a couple things together, but like a realization of how to utilize bleed, especially for new jams who run a horror game for the first time now. A very simple tool how to get also a bit more involvement of the players is to just ask the characters basically, what are you feeling right now? How do you think you would react to the situation? And keep on asking these questions every other scene or so, just to get them to think within the setting. Mm-hmm. Because as David said, a lot of the horror games are based on emotions, and you will not understand the emotion of your players if they don't tell you what their emotions are. So feel encouraged to ask them, how do you, like you as a player character, how do you feel right now? What is going through your head? And then you can make a quick note, like, oh, he's afraid that some X will happen or something. You write down the X thing, and you can bring it then later back in, or like threaten to bring it in as a GM. So basically, the players are giving you the tools to create a more immersive gaming while within the boundaries, because you know what their limits are, so you can maintain this atmosphere, but you ask the players to create their horror for you. And I think that's the easiest function as a new GM that you can do. Ask them how they feel. Ask them questions.
Yeah.
It's the
I think a
old
lot of
adage of
GMs
Vampire the Masquerade. So how do you feel? Which used to be the joke in like 4th edition and early 5th
okay.
edition.
Yeah. I feel like newer GMs kind of get stuck on the, oh, so what are you doing now? What do you do now? What are you doing now? And yeah, to break up that sort of monotonous, like, oh, task. I think a good question is, how do you feel now? Or just have a list of questions that you write out beforehand of interesting things that you want to tease out of your player characters to help evoke emotions. Anything else on this?
I think one thing that partially kind of relates to this, but is probably also very important for first-time GMs, which is pacing, especially when it comes to the idea of running a game either within a certain time frame, but also like if you want to incorporate all of these elements, and then you realize, horror games are inherently different from D&D, where you don't read the script from. They are starting at the castle. They go out of the castle. They fight goblins. After the goblins, they go back to the castle. They go back out. They fight orcs, and it's different. So, do you have some practical tips, maybe, for new GMs regarding pacing? What can one do? Well,
also, to add to that question, how do you, including pacing, how do you split up the tension? And this is where we can kind of get into how do we use humor or other sort of levity tools to help pace the story and also bring down the tension to bring it back up, or however you would do your particular story.
There are many, many, many ways to do this. There are many, many, many techniques, and you can read about them for years, and everyone has different opinions, and sometimes those opinions are contradictory. When you are a first-time GM, you're not going to be able to memorize it all, and if you read all of the books, you're not necessarily going to be any better. Take a breath, and that's the advice. Take a beat. Speak slowly. Pause. Give yourself time to think. If you need 10 seconds, take 10 seconds. There is no rush, and actually you will pace better if you take your time. Other moments you might start speaking really fast and it gets really exciting and you're building tension. And of course, learn to use your voice. If you're not that comfortable using your voice, then you'll need to learn, because it's part of the skills of being a GM. And you might not be very good at it at the start, and that's fine, but it is one of the skills that can make you good at this. So most people will speak too fast the first time they do this. So the first piece of advice, take a breath and take your time.
I think that's a very good key point with almost any horror game that you've got. It's not bam, bam, bam. You're going into the room. What are you going to do when you get into the room? How are you going to fight this goblin? What are you going to do? It's like you walk up to the door. It's a wooden door with the metal lock on it. You insert the key and you hear it click. The door creaks as dust comes out. It's thinking about that. It's almost, you almost kind of have to have that Nordic horror feeling behind setting the emotion of a scene, of this long drawn out, don't go full Nordic horror and take 6 years to open a door, but it's slowly down, and then as things happen and as the door opens, bang, something crashes off the shelf. And you have these moments where the pace increases to create that tension and break that cycle of almost ominous creep. Think about as a kid, maybe you've probably walked around the woods at night or around abandoned buildings. You don't tend to run around them unless you want to get hurt. You move slowly because you know it's dangerous. And so you do the same thing within a horror RPG. Move slowly because it's dangerous. Don't move quickly. But then as the tension builds up and you get to the scenes where something is going to happen, you can then start to increase the pace of the flow. Depending on whether it's a combat heavy game or whether it's a story heavy game, really will change the pace setting, because depending on initiative and kind of how the combat things are plays, I find one of the things I really hate about D&D, and it's something we said earlier, was you say this, you do this. And then it takes 10 minutes for one person to do something, and then you'd go on to the next one. And it can kind of ruin the flow, which is why when you see a lot of horror RPGs, the combat is way more story orientated. And it is way more role play orientated because it allows the flow of the story. But that's my 2 cents.
I also, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I also completely agree with taking a breath, slow burn, this kind of slow build up, letting the atmosphere sink in, describing what characters see, hear, like the senses really helps. And then what I personally struggled with when I started is when you get to that point when escalation comes around, that's where I struggled to find the right pacing up to there. It was always like, I think I was always doing pretty fine at the slow burn, setting it up, and then the shit's going down situation too. And it was that kind of middle ground of finding the right steps to lead up to it. I don't want to say it has to be sped up at all, but the thing that I always liked thinking of, or I tried to think of it in 3 stages, like being quite practical about it, of having first stage being dread, where it's the environmental storytelling, where the players slowly feel like, oh, something is off, like quite simplified right now. And then have the second stage be the terror, where they very much know something is wrong, something doesn't work, something is coming, but they still have the inability, or they're still unable to take a decisive action towards this point. And then thirdly was that the horror, the face-to-face, that here it is. And that kind of 3-step plan always helped me personally get that end of the pacing right, because that's what I just struggled with. So that would be my 2 cents too, because I think the slow burn, just as David kind of demonstrated, of the slow description, that's where horror lives. That's where the dread lives. That's where the uncertainty and that kind of silence builds. But yeah.
I completely agree. I even set a timer on my watch to go off every hour to help me keep that pacing specifically, because I tend to get into the act of storytelling, and I'll lose the plot in enjoying a scene that we're in when I need to keep that tension building. And kind of the framework that's helped me really get into that structure of horror is that fear is in the not knowing, right? And so how knowing that our protagonists have very little agency, they can't experience the horror that you're talking about until we're close to the climax of the story. So how do we start showing pieces of the horror that are just fate outlines, tiny puzzle pieces that don't make sense when seen by themselves? That as they continue to move through the experience, they get more puzzle pieces, and it still doesn't make sense, but they see a shape of something starting to take form. And just like you were saying, I start off with things in the environment, where the place itself, there's evidence of something having been there, or it has made an imprint on something that the characters experience, and build onto that until something that has agency over the characters. It's not just them passively experiencing something. Something starts to happen to them. There's some effect It's not the horror itself, but it is a byproduct or an effect of the horror. And then come the climax of the story, you get the actual horror itself and life and death situations start and end.
Mm-hmm. Given the time that we're about to come shortly to an end, I do want to also kind of set up or give one point on that, because yes, keeping time, taking it slow, and especially as a first-time horror GM, don't sign up for like a con game to be like your first horror experience. Find a group that you trust, because horror is again something emotional, something private in a sense almost, because you exploring boundaries that you're trying to kind of work on, and be upfront and say like, I think it should take a session, but can we just find 2 dates? Because if I run longer, I'd rather make a cut earlier than you would like to, and just keep the session short, but then take the time afterwards to do check-ins, to talk about like, how do you like it? Then you can already prep for the next session, given some feedback or some responses that you heard. Don't stress yourself out. Take a breath, tranquilo, and make it nice. Make it enjoyable for everyone.
John, did you have one more quick point before we end?
Please. No, I think we hit a really good point there. I think we should just... I can talk forever. Don't just get rid of me.
All right.
I'll save it for tomorrow's panel.
No, I'm moderating that one. Tough luck.
Cutting you off. Okay, well, with that then, I just want to thank you all, our amazing panelists. We'll go around one more time, and you guys can plug whatever you want to plug. Tell us who you are, and we'll probably see a lot of you in future panels. So let's start with Steve this time.
And maybe add one tool that you like for first GMs to notice from your personal experience.
Well, I'm going to shamelessly plug my premise document, which is all about aligning expectations for players before the session zero. How do you do a session zero right? And you can get it for free at aedpublishing.com.
And amazing. Where can people find you?
You can find me at aedpublishing.com or AED Publishing it on Blue Sky and Twitter and all the places, Instagram.
Fantastic.
Awesome. John.
My name is John Hedge. You can find me on Blue Sky or all over Discord on all the regular servers. I mostly hang out at the Miskatonic Playhouse. Right now, I'm preparing a set of writing groups for horror writers. So if you are interested in working with others and learning more about the process of writing, get in contact. You can just DM me on Discord and I normally respond, or find me on Blue Sky.
Cool. David? The other David? Yeah, you, David.
Just making sure. Yeah, hi, I'm David. You can find me on Discord. I'm part of the Darker Days radio crew where we talk about horror-themed RPGs mostly, branching out into all sorts of things at the moment. Freelance writer for various games. Looking for some more writing if anybody has any out there. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. I'm on Instagram and things like that. I also run a folklore podcast called Drunken Storyteller, and just started a new one called Dark Lore, where we explore the horror of folklore, which is proving quite popular. So go check that out.
Amazing. And Vince?
Thank you so much for having me. You can find me under Lorefall Studio on YouTube and Patreon. We are starting, actually really exciting, on Tuesday, the new Cult Deep Waters playthrough, which is going to be a weekly episode that I got to do with the help of Helmgast. So thank you. And if you want to check that out, that's starting Tuesday on our YouTube channel, or if you can't wait, on Patreon already. And my last tool for new horror GMs, which is going to be the obvious one, but as a film composer, I have to say this: music. It makes all the difference in atmosphere. It is, again, I'm biased, but find the right music, set the right atmosphere, talk with your players about atmosphere, and keeping it, that will get you a very long way to running a successful first horror game.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We'll put all your plugs into the YouTube description. And on behalf of myself and David Wartmann, the Illusion Con crew, thank you so much and have a great con.
Yeah, thank you and see you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.